So I am going to start this review with a question. Would you pair an RTX 3060 GPU with an Intel i3 12100F? Well, that is exactly what Cyberpower has done with the pre-built we are looking at today, and we are going to find out if it proves to be a good decision. I even end up swapping out the i3 for an i5 12400 to see if it makes sense to pay a bit more for a higher end CPU in a gaming PC like this. Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we are checking out the Cyberpower X123 Infinity Pro. This is a pre-built retailing for £899 here in the UK, designed to offer a solid 1080p or even 1440p gaming experience, while also keeping the best bang for buck possible. It's got an RTX 3060, Intel i3 12100F, 16GB of DDR4 memory, a B660 motherboard, and a 500GB SSD. The question we're going to find out today is, has Cyberpower cracked it with this pre-built, or have they cut too many corners? We'll kick things off then with a tour of the system as a whole, looking at the components as well as the overall build. That starts with the case then, where Cyberpower has opted for the Lian O11 Air Mini. I have to say I really like this case. It's still ATX but remains quite compact, build quality is excellent throughout, and you get top quality airflow with two 140mm intake fans at the front as well as a 120mm exhaust fan at the rear. But that being said, I actually think the O11 Air Mini is too good for the Infinity Pro, and let me explain. For me, it really comes down to pricing. The O11 Air Mini is currently on sale for about £100, so it is quite pricey considering the whole system costs £899. Personally, and feel free to disagree with me here, but I don't think the core spec in this PC actually needs a chassis this good. I would rather save about 50 quid and go for something like the Deepcool Macube 110, which is still an excellent case, and you could put that money towards a bigger SSD. We also have to bring in the motherboard here, which in this case is MSI's B660 MA Wi-Fi. This proved to be a very solid motherboard during my testing and is definitely more than a match for Intel's i3 12100F. That being said, it is actually a micro ATX board when the O11 Air Mini is actually an ATX chassis. So that means we have quite a bit of empty space towards the bottom of the case, which would otherwise be occupied by an ATX Mobo, and we can also actually see quite a bit of dead space towards the front of the chassis as well, just in front of those fans. Now, I don't want to be too critical here as everything works well together, and like I already said, I do actually think this is a very good case. I'm just not sure it's money well spent in a system that's really designed to extract maximum value, particularly when it's paired with a micro ATX motherboard. Moving on though, I can't complain about the memory as we have two 8GB sticks of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 clocked at 3200 MHz. These are CL16 modules, so they're not super tight timings, but for a system of this caliber, they will do the job just fine. As for storage, we can't actually see the SSD as it's hidden underneath a heatsink, but this is MSI's Spatium M390. It's only a PCIe Gen 3 drive rated at 3300 MB per second read and 2300 MB per second write, so it's not the fastest, but for a gaming PC it will do just fine. The bigger problem I have with this drive though is it's only 500GB in capacity and there's no other drives in this PC. So you can see why I thought it might be a good idea to save a bit of cash on the case and get a larger SSD instead. There is a second M.2 slot underneath the graphics card, so you could easily stick in a bit more storage if you wanted to, but 500GB out of the box really is going to get filled up almost instantly. And then we come to the CPU. This is Intel's i3 12100F, a quad-core unit with hyperthreading, offering a 4.1 GHz all-core turbo. There's no denying that quad cores are slowly becoming a thing of the past, so for me, a key part of this review is going to be how it fares when paired with the RTX 3060 for games. But before we do come on to the GPU, it is also worth noting that Cyberpower has stuck with the Intel stock cooler, bearing in mind that the i3-12100F only has a 58 watt TDP though. I personally don't think this is going to be a problem, but of course we will check out thermals later on in the review. Coming to the RTX 3060 then, this is the MSI Ventus 2X. It looks like a fairly basic dual fan model, but it should do the job just fine, and we definitely didn't need to spend any extra budget on a factory overclock card. Lastly then, we come to the power supply, which is a 650 watt unit from Inwin. This is 80 plus certified, so not even 80 plus bronze, and I definitely wouldn't say that Inwin was known for its PSUs. It's obviously a budget-minded choice, but for me, I really would have liked to see 80 plus bronze at the minimum. Still, if you've got any worries about this PSU, do remember Cyberpower does offer a 2-year warranty on parts and 5-year warranty on labour, so any issues within that time frame and they will have you covered. That is going to do it for our look at the system though, so it's time to move on to performance, and we'll start with some CPU benchmarks and other synthetic system benchmarks before coming on to gaming. I do have a few different systems we're going to use for comparison today, but in each of the charts I will label the core spec so you know exactly what we are comparing to this Cyberpower system. Kicking off with 3D Mark TimeSpy then, we're going to start by looking at the CPU score. The i3-12100F is only a quad core, but it still scores relatively well, though compared to the i5-12400F, it is obviously slower. Still, against the last generation i5-11400F, it's only 21% slower, despite having 33% fewer cores, which is impressive. Relatively speaking, the 12100F does even better in Cinebench R23, where it's only 16% slower than the 11400F, which really is pretty impressive considering the i5 has 2 extra cores. The single core result as well is only marginally behind the 12400F, and it is miles clear of the 11400F, which really is a testament to the Alder Lake architecture. As for the GPU score in 3D Mark TimeSpy, the MSI RTX 3060 proved exactly as fast as we'd expect, closely matching the RTX 3060 that I use in my GPU reviews, and it easily outscores the RX 6600, so that bodes well for our game benchmarks. AIDA64 memory benchmarks are also exactly as we'd expect, with speeds of 47,000 megabytes per second read and 46,000 megabytes per second writes. Other DDR4 kits can run a touch faster at the same frequency thanks to the tighter timings, but this kit is honestly fine for a system of this spec. I've also compared the Cyberpower system to the PC specialist Magnus Spark in PC Mark X. It's not quite as fast, mainly due to the fact that the Magnus Spark has an extra 2 cores, but the Cyberpower does come close, particularly in the essentials and productivity benchmarks. Lastly, I did also run Crystal Disk Mark on the SSD and confirm the quoted speeds as we hit 3400 megabytes per second reads and 2600 megabytes per second writes. It's honestly more than enough for a system in terms of the speeds, but it really is the size of the SSD which, for me, is the bigger problem. Let's move on to what we're all here for though, and that is the gaming benchmarks. For me, I was particularly curious to see how the i3 would do when paired with an RTX 3060. We know the Intel Alder Lake architecture is impressive, but would we see any signs of a CPU bottleneck? To really try and find that out, I actually did some extra testing for this video. First, I used the i3 and the RTX 3060 exactly as this system comes, and benchmarked 10 games at 1080p and 1440p. Then, however, I physically swapped out the i3-12100F and put in an Intel i5-12400, so that CPU has an extra 2 cores and slightly higher turbo clocks as well. I then reran all of my benchmarks so we can see exactly what difference would be made if you did upgrade to a higher core count CPU. Putting up all the game benchmark charts then, it quickly became obvious that the i3 12100F is more than a match for the RTX 3060 for both 1080p and 1440p gaming. In basically every game I tested, we just saw no difference in performance, with just fractional changes to the numbers based on run-to-run variance, so we are well within margin for error almost all of the time. I say almost all the time as there are just 2 examples where we saw a slight improvement to the 1% lows when using the i5. That was in GTA 5 at 1440p, and then both resolutions in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. But even in those cases, the i3 was still perfectly playable. The i3 and RTX 3060 combo actually proved to be very good overall, hitting 60 FPS at ultra settings in every single game we tested at 1080p, and it can definitely do a job at 1440p as well. Overall then, for the 10 games we tested, you can see just how little difference upgrading the CPU made. We see just a 1% average change to the 1% lows, and an even smaller difference for the average frame rate. Of course, these numbers can only take into account what it's like for gaming right now. It's hard to really say with any certainty how the situation may change in a couple of years, and if the i3 will begin to struggle down the line. What we can say based on this data though is right now, if you are looking for a top-notch value gaming CPU, the i3 12100F really is a cracking choice. Moving on though, we're going to come on to thermal performance now, and here I did test both the i3 and the i5 just to show you what things would be like if you did want to upgrade the CPU. As both CPUs do actually use the same Intel stock cooler, despite the i5 having a slightly higher TDP, it wasn't a surprise to see the i5 running a little bit hotter, but it wasn't by much. And I have to say the stock cooler on the i3 did very well indeed, keeping peak package temperatures below 80 degrees, whether that was in gaming or in Cinebench. Likewise, the MSI Ventus 2X RTX 3060 proved no problem at all, hitting 68 degrees for the GPU temperature and then 79 degrees for the hotspot, which are both very respectable results. Noise levels again proved innocuous, hitting 37 dBA with the stock i3 installed, but if you do switch to an i5, I did notice the stock cooler had to ramp up the fan a bit more aggressively, and that does result in more noise, hitting 40 dBA while gaming. Even that though isn't bad at all and is easily drowned out with a gaming headset. Lastly, power draw is nice and low, hitting about 280 watts while gaming with the i3 installed, and this increased by about 20 watts if you do upgrade to the i5. That leaves a ton of headroom with our 650 watt PSU, so there is definitely scope for a GPU upgrade down the line as well. All in all then, the Cyberpower X123 Infinity Pro really has been a very interesting pre-built to review. Priced at £899, it really is all about extracting maximum gaming performance at this price point, which is perfectly shown off by the fact that the RTX 3060 GPU costs almost half the budget of the entire system. Still, we can't deny it does very well for 1080p and 1440p gaming. I have to be honest, I did think that the i3 was going to be a bit of a bottleneck for the RTX 3060, but my testing today clearly shows otherwise. You could argue that upgrading to an i5 will maybe future-proof the system a bit more, and that is probably true, but we just can't sit here and say with any certainty when exactly the i3 will no longer be good enough for gaming. As things stands right now, it really is a terrific value gaming CPU. The thing I would say on the CPU though, if you do end up wanting to upgrade, definitely have a look at the pricing. At the time of filming this video, to switch from an Intel i3 12100F to the i5 12400F on Cyberpower's website will currently set you back an extra £214, which is frankly absolutely ridiculous considering the real world price difference between those two CPUs is only about £65. Cyberpower is charging 3 times that on their online configurator, and that is absolutely outrageous behaviour. My other criticism of this system comes down to the SSD and the case. A 500GB SSD is just not enough storage space in 2022, and I'd actually run out of space after installing just 4 games. That could be avoided though, as in my opinion, the Lian 011 Air Mini case is just too expensive for this system. Going for a cheaper micro ATX chassis could easily shave off £50 from the asking price, and you could put that money towards getting a 1TB SSD instead. Even then, the bang for buck on offer from this system really is excellent, and the i3 and RTX 3060 combo really does motor through the latest games. It may not be perfect, but it is cracking value at £899. That is going to do it for this video though guys, so if you liked it, please do toss me a thumbs up, and as always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Are you in the market for a new pre-built, and would you consider this one from Cyberpower? Let me know your thoughts. You can also subscribe if you haven't already and ding that notification bell, and why not come chat with us on our Discord server, which is linked in the description. While there, you can find a link to our merch store, and you could even consider backing us on Patreon. That's it for this one though guys, I'm Dominic, 4Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.